Was that heat or air? Cold?
It's
It's just a fan. Okay. Not heat or cold, it was just a fan. So depending on what you wanted, it was that, or, okay. Illusion of coolness, okay. When I first came to the monastery, which is Gold Mountain Monastery, San Francisco, it was called the icebox, the refrigerator. It was never warm, never warm. If you had hot days like we had last week, it was tolerable inside. In the winter, it was unbearable. It was just totally freezing. So to be in a monastery where they have air conditioning is like kind of a new experience for me. Anyhow, it's off, so we'll probably heat up. Well, welcome back to everybody. It's been a while since we've been together, since what? May? Middle of May? Yeah. So I see a lot of familiar faces, and that's good. You're back. You made it through, and see some new faces, and that's good too. And some old faces, maybe not. For me personally, I lost, or 3 close people, friends of mine, left this summer. So it was a summer of impermanence. And some of those were very close, not only personally for me, but close because I was there, at least with one of them, during his passing. So it was a very, I would say, inspiring and disturbing experience simultaneously. So I'm still working through that. Maine was Maine, as it always is, and then the only thing that's different are the people that come. So there's this constant backdrop, the birds, the geese, the moose. They seem to be unchanging, but it's people that changed. And this summer was also change, a lot of change going on there. One was I finally found a pop-up meditation tent. And so this is a tent that pops up, and you don't have to plant it in the ground, and it's this lovely dome shaped, and then it's got netting all around. And I got this one specifically because this is meant for meditators up in Maine. It's got netting that's called no-seum netting. Oh, I see, some of you are nodding, you know what no-seums are, right? When I was first up there, I had no idea, and all these things were biting me, and I couldn't see anything. And the old timer up there said, "Oh, those are called no-seums." You know, I thought, what? He's pulling my leg, but they're so tiny you can't see them. But boy, they can bite. And they can slip through most screens, except this had a no-seum netting. So I could be sitting there, and then I could hear them, the mosquitoes and the bugs and everything, but they couldn't get in. So this was a wonderful experience, except the dog kept sticking his nose in underneath the screen to check if I was okay. Every time she did that, the no-seums would get in, and then we'd start this thing again. But it was a good thing. I set up a meditation spot on the far side of the point where we have our cabin. It's very, very quiet there, extremely quiet. Just sitting there in silence, I heard sounds that I never heard before. The actual growing of trees, the movement of worms, and these tiny little birds that will never come close to humans except when they think there's not a human there. And they would just gather and flutter outside this place. And if I just sat perfectly still, nature came to me in ways I never experienced before. The other side of this was, on that side, you're very remote. So if you're not careful, if you have an accident or something, you're doomed. Luckily, I had one, but it didn't knock me out. Although it should have. I won't go into details about this. Somehow I came through it unscathed. To this day, I don't know, because I landed, it dropped about 5 or 6 feet, landed on my back, and there was a granite boulder, like a pyramid-like granite boulder, and I looked to my right, and there it was, just poking up. So I missed impaling the back of my head on that. But my brother-in-law came down to bail out one of the boats, and next thing I know, he's screaming for help, and I thought, oh, he's just trying to mess with my meditation because he knows I'm sitting. But I could tell by his voice that he wasn't. So I ran down and I actually saved him because he had stepped into the boat and hit a hole in the seating. There's a little square hole. He slipped, he got his leg turned, and he did a 180-degree turn with his leg pinned. So you can imagine. And so when you see that, your stomach just, oh, wow, because he was backward in the water, just gasping for air because he couldn't get up. There was nothing to grab. So if I hadn't been there, it'd been all over. And pulling up was not easy because he was in such pain. So you could see the crack, as you pull him up. And fortunately, they said it was a clean break, whatever that means. Anyhow, he hobbled back on my shoulders through the woods, and we'll live to do another season up in Maine. But all of us were, sort of a little chastened by age and accidents and all that. Anyhow, that was my summer, more or less. I'm not really ready to be back, but here we are. We're ready to go. We're going to get back into the Sixth Patriarch tonight. I wrote emails to some of the students who kind of follow this and asked where we were. And the consensus is, and this is a consensus, that we're on page 78, which means we finished up last May this disciple Zhi Chang up to the bottom of page 77. Everybody sort of remember this? Okay. The only thing I would say is to go back to page 77 because I think there's a really important point there that's easy to pass over. In this last section with Zhi Chang, and of course, those of you who are new to the text, this is called the Lively Encounters chapter. These are the narratives, records of his back and forth exchanges with some of his key students or disciples. And we don't always know what happened to all of these disciples. Some we know went on to become, if you want to use a famous or renowned in their own right as teachers, and others seem to have just gone, and we don't know what happened. But the exchanges were significant enough because they give in detail the living teaching as opposed to just the abstract. So you're seeing an exchange happen here, and it's not just living as it's between two people, but it is existentially right on. What do they say? Spot on, because it is going right to the specifics of that individual, not a general statement. And so one caution you have to have on this is do not try to generalize this to some dogmatic absolute statement of creed that the Sixth Patriarch is giving. Because it'd be very easy to say, he said this, and he said this, and you put it all together. You have to contextualize and to say, he said this to this person at this time with these conditions. And we might have a pattern here. We might say with a certain person who's got an affliction of anger or over-intellectuality or greed for meditation states, he taught this. Now, somebody else who didn't have those could be taught something else or nothing at all. So you have to remember when we go back and say the Sixth Patriarch said, we have to put it into the context of the exchange that happened here and then take the spirit of it, not necessarily the letter. And his spirit, as he defines it, anyone want to give a shot at it as he defines what he's doing? He's his self-description of what he's doing as a teacher. Anybody remember a kind of telling passage? Right. A little louder. He simply says, I don't have a teaching to give you. I merely untie knots and call it a teaching or call it samadhi. Now that's very interesting because he's actually explaining these encounters as being the knots that people come with, and we'll go into what these knots are because they're different, but we come knotted up, so to speak, in the unawakened, unenlightened stage. We're knotted up, we're tied up, we're obstructed, we're kind of ensnared in some ways, we're stuck. He unsticks, he unglues, he unties. And the untying itself is the Dharma. There's no other Dharma. He doesn't untie and then give Dharma. He simply unties, and the very untying, somehow in the untying of the knot, The student, in and of him or herself, through their own process of wanting to be untied and opens naturally. It's a natural response. And they see things directly for themselves. And then they have wonderful things they say. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they have joy, but often they just say, wow, I get it, thank you. And that's it. And nothing is actually sort of passed on and saying, here is the Dharma now. It's the letting go of what obstructs that in and of itself becomes the mechanism for liberation, and then that's the Dharma. The Dharma has served its purpose, and then obviously once the purpose is served, there's no more need for this particular teaching. So the thing I wanted to point to in this exchange with Zhichang is Zhichang was sort of coming at this as a formal, almost scholastic study. And his last thing he was asking was questions about the different vehicles that the Buddha had mentioned in a text called the Lotus Sutra, which is this one. I'm not going to open up again, because if I open this one up, we'll get lost in this and we won't get to that one, which is okay. Getting lost in sutras is not a bad way to spend a Friday night. But that being said, I'm going to put the Lotus down for tonight. If you want to get lost on another Friday night, we can go back to this, to the burning house, because we left everybody in the burning house, sort of what happened, to be continued. They did get out. The kids got out of the burning house. Just a sort of spoiler. How they got out of those is really interesting, but I'm not going to go there. Zhichang then, he is asking, he's sort of still trying to figure out what's the best vehicle. Which vehicle should I take up? And he said there were 3 vehicles. And remember, the Sixth Patriarch says his first line is really beautiful in this passage. Only pay attention to your original, fundamental mind. Don't get entangled in the external form of the Dharma. This is a very, very important statement. He's saying that the Dharma is meant to entangle your own mind. Only pay attention to that. Only pay attention to untangling your mind, getting rid of your bad habits and faults and afflictions and attachments. Okay? Once you pay attention to that, and you can untie that, that's what the Dharma is for. But if you get attached to the external form of Dharma, this Dharma is better than that Dharma. I should bow, I should meditate, I should recite, I should memorize, I should go on a pilgrimage and so forth. The external form of it is not the substance. The substance is this, yourself. The form is merely a vehicle, and this is very interesting language, a vehicle to get you to the substance. It's like, well, I'm in the substance. Yes, we're in the substance, but the Sixth Patriarch point is we're asleep and unaware that right within this being, this substance is a Buddha. Asleep, dormant. This sleeping Buddha within needs to be awakened. Dharma is to awaken the sleeping being within. He calls it the Buddha within. And he says there's no other Buddha to liberate. There's no other Buddha to awaken. Why would you want to awaken another Buddha? They're already awakened. Awaken your own. So he comes back to this. He said, but sometimes you get so devout, I want to use this cautiously, so religious, so intent on seeking something, you forget the substance and get attached to the form, the external form of it. And think by doing this over and over again, even with utmost intensity, and let's call it a kind of misplaced sincerity, because you sincerely want, but you don't sincerely work on the right place. So wanting it and working on it are not quite the same. And so he's saying if you get attached to external form and ignore the substance, you can cultivate till the moon turns chartreuse or whatever. It's not going to work, because the Dharma is brought up and released from within. Awakening comes from within your own nature. So that's why he's saying, by looking at these different vehicles, wondering which one's better, which one's worth, how do they work out, he says you're completely missing the meaning. So the term vehicle then becomes this term, a dynamic conveyance device. So I would say, if we're really, and the reason I'm pointing to this passage tonight is 2. 1, the description of Dharma as a dynamic conveyance device, not a static holding place, not a rock, not a foundational, home that you dwell in, even in the sense you say, I'm in the temple. But rather, it's active. It's to get you to go from one place to the other. So you see it as for me, a canoe or a kayak on moving water. I need to get through that moving water. The water is moving, conditions are always changing, but I need some stable device that I can rely on to navigate that water. But once I'm through that, there's no reason to keep that device anymore. So this is the same thing here. The word vehicle, you could say, oh, it's kind of a Chinese expression, but it actually, metaphorically, it really conveys something very, and I use the word dynamic, moving, as opposed to a holding or a static thing. And so that's the first thing to sort of get at, and then it's like, okay, so what's Dharma for? Is it to worship? Is Dharma to collect? Even in the sense that you collect physical forms of it, like scrolls and books, and put them on shelves or something, or is it something almost, to use another metaphor, to be eaten? Now, I don't mean literally to be eaten, but eaten in the sense of ingested, digested, internalized, and then allowed to transform. So it's almost like he's saying Dharma is catalyst. God, there has to be scientists here. Now I put myself on a limb. What's a catalyst? I know, but I'm not. Yeah, so tell me, what's a catalyst? Anybody? Huh?
Jason has his hand up.
Who's got a hand up?
It lowers the activation energy of a chemical reaction.
Yes.
So it facilitates actual transformation of something, or
It makes stuff happen.
Yes, it makes stuff happen.
It makes stuff happen. It facilitates a transformative moment. But what's interesting about a catalyst, once the activation is done, the catalyst loses its role or significance. Once it starts that process going, then the catalyst is no longer needed. So this is the one that's used. The Buddha didn't refer to catalyst, maybe because they didn't have the same word for it then. I think there was chemistry, but that's another point. He used the raft. He used the raft. He said the raft is a device that you throw together to get from one place to another across a dangerous body of water. Once you've used the raft to cross over, you can get rid of it. So the word tonight we're using is catalyst, which is a more biochemical sense, that it instigates or activates or stimulates a transformative event. And once that event is going, the catalyst is no longer needed. So that's how I would translate his thing about the Dharma as catalyst here. And that's how we see it. And so the reason for coming on a Friday night or a Saturday night, the reason for going to a retreat, the reason for doing bowing is catalytic. It's all catalytic. It's not to accumulate, okay? It's like, boy, I got my little, counting my recitations, counting the, I'm my bank stock, my merit and virtue bank account is really budding. No, it's not. You don't do it as a cumulative, nor do you do it as an escape from reality, nor is it to be done with an idea of there is other power here that will save me. But it's to be done catalytically, almost as if I am mixing this stuff together, and what's going to transform? Me. I am the agent and the goal of the transformation. So when I bring the Dharma in, these practices, these teachings, and they're good then, because it's not there's anything wrong with them, but used in the right way, they become catalysts. Used in the wrong way, he says, you lose their activity, they become, what's the opposite, I guess? Inactive or sterile or inert. There it is. They become inert. So Dharma becomes inert when you're not using it to work on your person. It just becomes that out there. But when it's used catalytically, it is transformative. It's powerful. It's very powerful. Sometimes it's scarily powerful because the rate at which you transform and the depth at which you change or confront yourself sometimes is like breathtaking once you get into it. And it's meant to do that. But that's one point. Now, if we go on to the next passage here, and he reaffirms this is the last line. Vehicles, Dharma, methods, practices, are methods of practice, not subjects of debate. And then he says, cultivate yourself, don't ask me. This is really, really strong. So he's actually emphatically stressing the point that Dharma are methods of transformation, they're catalysts, not subjects of debate. Where did that come from? Thank you. Where did that come from, subjects of debate? Why would he say that? Now again, think of Zhi Chang. Is it? Yeah, think of Zhi Chang.
Well, he can have this from a very intellectual perspective, right?
Seems to have, and seems to be wanting to get into the finer points of the vehicles, the distinctions between the vehicles, almost scholastic. Remember the little kid too? Remember when the little kid came to meet the teacher? Did we get to Shun Wei yet? Oh, we didn't get to Shun Wei yet? No? Is Shun Wei coming up? The precocious adolescent?
Next chapter.
Oh, next chapter, okay. Well, here's a heads up. We get to Shun Wei. Shun Wei comes in and he also wants to debate. He wants to show off for the teacher. So he's also, a lot of the disciples that come in for one reason or other have used these devices as appropriation of knowledge appropriated, and then they're using it to actually build up their sense of ego and self rather than to use it to rub it away. Knowledge sometimes can do that. It's very funny. And sometimes the pursuit of knowledge isn't always altruistic. It's actually for power building, ego building. It's not necessarily for just, oh, I'm just so curious. And the way it comes out is when it's used in debate to put someone down, to make a score point in discussion or whatnot. And at this time, this was clearly the case that was going on with this teaching of Buddhism. It was certainly the case during the Buddha's time. And if you read some of the early Pali Sutras, you see the Buddha constantly exhorting his disciples, don't take this up with the wrong attitude, which is to debate this and wrangle and have discussions of win or lose. It's not about that. And he actually has, the reason I'm saying that it probably was prevalent is the fact that it's mentioned in the text and it's exhorted against. If it wasn't an issue, the Buddha wouldn't have to mention it. So obviously, the use of religious knowledge or religious insight or awakening to debate, to put down, to build yourself up, to show off, to acquire fame and so forth, all is considered a misuse of this. And so what he's saying here is cultivate yourself. Use this to cultivate yourself. Don't ask me, and don't use it as a subject for debate. It's sort of like debating medicine. Medicine is meant to be taken to heal an illness. It's not, I won the aspirin debate. So what? I won the chemotherapy debate. So what? It's not a debate thing. You go to the hospital to see a doctor, you don't go in to have a debate. Or you don't go in to watch the doctors debating. You go in to get treatment. So he's saying approach the Dharma in the same way. It's meant to be taken up as treatment. You have both a humble and curious attitude for it, but you're always looking for the bottom line, the existential bottom line. How does this work? How does this activate? How does this transform?
So occasionally, through this text, I'm aware that the subject of right thinking comes up and right acting. And how do you square that, or can it be squared against what this point is that the text is making now? How, certainly right thinking is something that we ordinarily think you would acquire in some way, right? There's a process and approach to right thinking. It's something that can be acquired and learned through acquisition of knowledge, perhaps. Or is that a completely the wrong track? Is that not the point of what right thinking is at all?
Well, and sometimes there's a notion called right views, part of the Eightfold Path, so right thinking, right views. Is a very good question. Everybody understand his question? So you have an Eightfold Path, which is an elaboration of the Fourth Noble Truth, which is how do you go about catalyzing, transforming. And it's called the Eightfold Path, sometimes reduced down to Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, but it has to do with certain not only behaviors that render you into a position of stability and sensitivity that allows you to untie the knots and so forth, but also certain mental processes and even intellectual propositions or views or opinions more closely to what it's being talked about, a very hard-held view or idea that is almost like intractable. It's what I hold no matter what, even when factual evidence contradicts it. This is what's getting more into the views. So it's not just a sort of like, oh, I think today was a nice day, that's my view. And somebody says, well, I don't think it was. And you say, well, whatever. No, your view is, you have a view of saying the hurricanes are coming, are the god Tor punishing us for our, and we say, well, no, there's not. No, it is actually that way. I would really be, that's an opinion, it's a view. So that's one thing to get the language clear here about the thinking. But the other point is that although you see right views and right thinking as a prerequisite for liberation, it is not a substitute for liberation, but merely presented the Buddha to say, just as you do certain things or you feel certain things, you can think certain things that won't get you there. That a priori, for example, denying cause and effect. If there's no cause and effect, you deny cause and effect, then you're not subject to any results from what you do, nor is it possible you change your situation. So you tie yourself up. You cannot liberate yourself if you deny causality in that fundamental way. That's considered a view or a thinking that's off. But ultimately, the test of it being off is not because it doesn't conform to the Buddhist philosophy or religious creed, but because it doesn't work. It doesn't deliver. So the Buddha was actually saying the thinking is right or wrong in that it pragmatically produces these results in your exploration and willing to know for yourself. And he's just saying, I'm going to give you a heads up. This thought won't get you there. Now go ahead if you want to, but it's not going to get you there. This action of killing will not get you there. You know, and so again, you have to.
Debating
will not get you there.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you actually look at everything he's doing, it's pragmatic and catalytic. All of the teachings, even when it's presented as a view or thinking, it's pragmatic in the sense that it won't produce these results, but in fact will lead to a kind of another knot, an intellectual knot, maybe a very sophisticated one, maybe one you can beat other people over the head with and they don't know how to come back at you. Well, if everything is empty, then why would we bother to cultivate? If there's no self, then there's no rebirth. And oh gosh, I never thought of that. You won the debate, but are you no, you're not freed. So he's saying don't go down that road. But it's a very good question, because sometimes it's mistaken as Buddhist catechism. You must believe this, you must have these thoughts or views. And the Buddha never intended that way. In fact, these only come up, very interestingly, all of the precepts that we're told to follow, including the 250 and so forth for the monastics and so forth, all come about through existential situations like this. None of them come where the Buddha goes up to a mountain or in a cave and says, geez, let's see, I think I'll come up with 10, 15, 20 of these, you know. Well, I'm on a roll here. Maybe I'll come 250. Whoa, let's elaborate. Here they are. Everybody goes like, what? Here they are. These are the precepts. You know, he's just saying, he said, at all times, investigate your own mind, untie your own knots, try to get through all your suffering and attachments and see things really clearly. At all times, cultivate yourself. And then somebody comes in and says, I was really doing it, and then what? Well, like, you know, I really got angry, and then, you know, it led to a fight, and then, you know, I killed my brother-in-law. And the Buddha said, oh, okay, so from now on, if you're cultivating the way, try not to kill. And the same thing, all these precepts come about because people could not follow just a simple dictum of do no evil, only do good, purify your mind. 3 things. The Buddha just said, okay, everybody okay? Good, good. And people go on and say, well, I tried, but then this came up, I stole that, I killed this, and, you know, I cheated on that. And the Buddha said, okay, so laid them all down in response to be specific when people would not be able to apply. And all of these are specific. If you read the Vinaya, you'll see that the what they call the spirit of the law is in these situations that evoke the Buddha to say, from now on, bhikshus, bhikshunis, lay people should not do this because it won't lead to liberation. But it actually came about because people were doing things that weren't seeing it. But it wasn't like it was laid down in advance, but it was rather laid down as people tied themselves into different knots. So this is very important to see. The evolution of the Vinaya itself is an existential, pragmatic reciprocal response to situations. And you can imagine us now coming up with new situations with all the science and technology and whatnot available to us that were not there at the Buddha's time. And you could actually see from the spirit of that, you could then come up with new precepts of how you would conduct yourself in thought, in action, in feeling, based on the new existential situations, right? So this, why it's important to study in this way is to come away with the spirit of it, which allows you to keep it dynamic and evolving as opposed to static. I mean, Buddha never said anything about designer babies, so it must be okay. The Buddha never said anything about making military clones of people, cyborgs. I didn't see it, it's not in the Vinaya, so it must be okay. And then he's like, a Buddha comes in and says, whoa, wait a minute. What are you doing? What are you talking about? Where's this coming from? What's its intention? What are the implications of it? What are the effects it causes? How does it develop the human nature? How does it erode human nature? How does it relate to our fellow beings and so forth? And if it's all these things and harmless and good and whatnot, go ahead. And if it's not, you should pause, no matter what it is. So again, even if we want to make Dharma something fixed and hard, the very existential situations, the exigencies of our life require us to be nimble and alert, constantly reapplying this in a way that gets to the basic. Is this liberating? Is this humanizing? Is this bringing out full deliberation of joy and happiness and equanimity and so forth? And if it's not, we have to pause, even though the Buddha didn't quote say it. So, okay. I just want to get to that last point here, cultivate yourself, and then at all times, your own essential nature is truly this. He's just basically saying, never lose that ground of your being in any situation. Always be reflecting. Always touch that base. Now we go on.
I just want to ask a quick question.
Oh yeah, there's no quick questions, but go ahead.
I just wonder if I could use a little history lesson on what debate meant at that time, because it sounds like you're using it rather formalistically, like there was a tradition of some sort of arguing it out until someone wins, as opposed to a looser sense.
There was that.
Okay.
There was formal debate in India at that time, debate was considered to be high art and sport. It was like in America, last night, people watched people giving each other traumatic brain injuries over beer. That's sport. In India, they used to have massive debates. For example, when Xuanzang went to India, you know Xuanzang?
Okay, you took all the books over.
Yeah, the guy brought all the books back from India. Boy, does he have a library fine, huh? He didn't return them. Translated them. So Xuanzang is a famous monk who, hearing all the different teachings coming into China at the time, tried to figure out, I can't get a handle on this. It's really hard to organize all this because they seem to be inconsistent or sometimes even contradictory. And so he left China, went to India. He wasn't easy to get out of China in those days. Well, I suppose not easy now either, but it wasn't easy then because he was considered to be a kind of precious national resource. And so he had to sneak up. And he really pissed the emperor off. But when he brought all the books back, then it was okay again. But it was not easy. He snuck out, went to India. It was a very difficult journey. He didn't, at that time, very difficult journey. And you want to read it. There's his biography, autobiography is really a read. It's incredible. What is it? Journey to the West. And he said, well, he went to India, that's east, but it was west. Right. Journey to the West. It's his autobiography. And it's got incredible detail, archaeological, anthropological detail that nobody else recorded at the time. And then happenings that you're going to go, what? Your hair will stand on end as you read some of these. But he makes it through. He goes through the Gobi Desert, goes over the Pamir Mountains, gets into India. And one of the high points of his time in India is the debate. And here he is. He's a foreign monk. He learns master Sanskrit, which he says, by the way, those of you who are studying Sanskrit should take solace in this. The most difficult thing he ever undertook in his life. And this guy's smart. He said, that was hard. Crossing the mountains, going through the desert, the ghosts and goblins was easy. Sanskrit was hard. And he gets really good at Sanskrit. And so every year at Nalanda University, where he was studying, They have the big event of the year. It's not the Super Bowl, it's not the NCAA playoffs, it's the debate, the religious debate where various people of different persuasions come and debate the finer points of their teachings. And then it's judged and it's weighed. And now, underneath this, there is a currency of general debate and argumentativeness that's just in the kind of discourse. You could be at a restaurant someplace and you'd say, I think it's A, and they say, well, you say it's A, it could be B, it could be C. And this is just it's in the culture. So there's a general sense of that. But it's a high form too. So he participates in this debate, and it must be like really interesting, because before this, you generally have Central Asians or Indians mostly, and here you have this foreigner from China who's just learned the language. And so he wins the debate. This is this great moment. His prize, he gets an elephant. He gets his own elephant. He gets this incredibly good nutmeg. And then he gets a year's supply of the best rice that India has to offer at the time. Now, none of this gold medal junk. This guy gets an elephant, nutmeg, and rice. Not bad, huh? I was thinking you graduate, you get your PhD, and then you get, no, I want the elephant, nutmeg, and the rice. I don't want the parchment. So it was both a formal and it was also culturally informal, but a lot of emphasis and energy was put on the process of debating points and winning by what was considered to be logic and rationality at the time. That's why some of the greater teachers who are cross between China and India, say like Vasubandhu or Nagarjuna or whatnot, are considered to be really skillful at the methods of logic and debate when they present their points. So if you ever read them, you realize, man, this is very rational. This is very systematic the way they think. But again, if you read them closely, you realize they're only doing that because that is the mechanism by which Indian thought worked. You know, if they were into art and imagery and not into logic, then Nagarjuna would have been an avant-garde artist. I'm trying to make a point here. So we have to ask, to what extent that's carry over to, say, the United States and Europe. You have to look and say, what is the mechanism by which people make sense of things, but also tie themselves in knots? And that's where the Dharma has to come and move to liberate. See, so it wouldn't necessarily be the same. In a non-debating, sort of hyper-intellectual society, reading those texts would have no purchase on you, and might even have an adverse effect, saying, this is crap, why am I reading this? This is so boring. Whereas seeing an image or doing a meditation retreat might have a much more profound effect at a particular time. So you have to figure out, in terms of Dharma, what's appropriate, what ties in any one time. Okay, so is that quick, long question? Long answer, quick question. Oh my gosh, 5 minutes. And I promise I'm going to try to stay within clock this semester. I probably won't fulfill that, but... Okay. Any other points on this? Questions? Insights? Debating disagreement? Yes! I knew that would get somebody.
This reminds me also of how we can set up identities in our schools or our sect or our particular teacher, because he's talking about small vehicle, middle vehicle, and great vehicle, and that, sometimes we would just say, oh, we belong to the great vehicle, and then set up an identity, and then start looking down on other people. So he's, in a way, reminding that vehicles are methods for practice. It's not for us to build an attachment to, and definitely not for.
Right. And as we get into this next section, the point you're making is really important, because at the heart of what he's doing, and at the heart of what the Buddha was doing, is deconstructing identity. Deconstructing identity. The human, as what he's saying, if you wanted to polarize it almost, the human potential for full awakening, for full liberated understanding and happiness and joy is innate in the human nature. But so is an interesting counter force of setting up identity and collapsing that vast, great, open mind down into a narrow me and mine. And it's this tension that is at the heart of this teaching. And that's why I consider it to be not culturally bound or historically bound at all. It is a universal recurring element of me, constantly trying to set up, attach, cling to, make some identity of me or mine, whether it's gender, whether it's nationality, whether it's religion, whatever it is, set up in that, and this pushing force that says, let go, release your hold, be free, get out of that cage. And that tension is in the human. And I think all of these teachings come back to that. And what he's saying is, almost sadly, ironically, we take a tool of liberation, let's call it religion, and it actually becomes a prison of attachment. So the very tools that we could use to liberate ourselves, we actually then take hold of and turn into the opposite if we're not careful. And that's why throughout all this, and people say, I don't like this Buddhist stuff because it always just, like, there's so much emptiness, and there's nothing, the point is there because it wants you to let go. It wants you to pick it up as long as it gets you. But as soon as you cling to it past that point, then you ruin it, you spoil it, you turn it into something else. So it's got to be here. If there wasn't the emptiness and the letting go here, this would not be a profound teaching. It would just be another form of identity and attachment. Identity politics, identity religion, identity whatever you want to call it. Identity is the killer of awakening. And so what he's working on here and this next encounter, which we're not going to get to tonight, but I hope you will, even if you don't come, pay attention to this, because it's a really contemporary exchange that's going on between a postmodern nihilist stance and something that's trying to make it eternally bound religious true. And he's trying to get the Sixth Patriarch to say which one it is. And you'll see how nimble the Sixth Patriarch is by saying it's neither. But that isn't to say it's nothing at all either. So this next exchange is extremely important because it goes right to the psychological core. Not the Buddhist, not the cultural, not the Chinese, the human psychological core of wanting to set up, to attach, to identify, and knowing somewhere inside of us that it doesn't work. It's like if it worked, there'd be no reason for, if we could actually identify and reify ourselves as this permanent, stable, unchanging, eternal, being that not only is that way, but will go off to another world that's permanent, unchanging, stable forever and ever. Yeah, if that were true, if it worked, there'd be no reason for any of this. The problem is, much as we want it, it doesn't work. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't pop a balloon. I've been trying to, I would say since the time I was a kid, trying to get that. And every time I grab it, it was just another bubble that popped, another bubble that popped. And finally you start to realize, hey, there seems to be a recurring thing here that everything I reach out to attach and grab slips through my fingers, it pops. Maybe I'm coming at this wrong. Or, what did Einstein said, how did he put it? There's this wonderful expression, to keep trying to get some result through something that's not producing that result is really, how does he say it? Anybody know that famous quote?
Doing the same thing without expecting a different result is insanity.
Yeah, something that's insane. And it hurts. It actually hurts. It's like watching the moth in Maine trying to, connect with the light. And then watching the bee in Maine trying to break through the window to get outside. And the bee will actually beat itself to death against that window pane trying to get out. It sees, and it just keeps going and going and going. It's interesting, I figured out the way to do that, is you open the window on the bottom, and they'll never go down the bottom. They'll just go bang, 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 hit the pane. And then you take a piece of cardboard or a dark thing, and you put it on the other side of the window. And the bee goes, hey, that's not a door. And it drops down and goes out the window. But if you don't put that up, the bee just keeps doing this. That's a wonderful, I was thinking that's a good metaphor for the Dharma. So the Buddha brings a sutra, puts it up to our window, and hey, boom, and we go out. Not bad, I like that. Okay, so next week, next Friday night, we're going to really get into this concept of nirvana, which is at the heart of what Jir Dao is asking. And basically, he's a little freaked out because he's been cultivating, And he's heard that everything is empty and impermanent, so he thinks there's nothing. On the other hand, he wants to get nirvana, but he also heard there's no self to get and enjoy nirvana, so he's really tied himself in a knot. So if there's no self, who gets nirvana and who gets to enjoy it? And if there's no enjoyment, what's the point of cultivating? So you see how present this is. So these are the questions he's asking. It's a wonderful exchange. So next week we'll come at it again. And I might talk a little bit next week too about sort of general, what I call Western or early Western misinterpretations or struggling with this term of nirvana, what it meant and what it didn't mean, and how that was worked over, and how, what's interesting, a term of liberation in one frame or one paradigm actually becomes the opposite in another paradigm. So the first Western encounter with the terms nirvana, with the translations, turned out to be really negative, and not seen as virtuous at all, but as really death wishes, a denial of life. And then Buddhism was then rendered through this as totally pessimistic and life-denying. And the ultimate goal was, as one of the scholars put it, utter annihilation. So we'll go into a little bit of that next week, then we'll go into this part and seeing how the Sixth Patriarch works with it and how he answers this question for him, which is very interesting. And then see in our own process what we understand this to be and how we work with it through concepts of. So we're back, we're on a roll. Any other questions? Announcements. We have a new bhikkhu. That was Ching Shen and now he's Jin Hui. Okay. He's gone from novice to fully ordained. He was put in a cocoon as a little caterpillar, and he came out a butterfly.
So the semester is begun, right? So on last Wednesday, Steve Tainer started his course, and on this coming Monday, Doug Powers will start his Buddhist for the Modern Mind. Do you know the?
So we brainstormed this afternoon. So we're gonna do, since in the summer we did Lucy Irigare and Nagarjuna. So we're thinking of Irigare with the conversation with Friedrich Nietzsche, marine lover, and the Paramitas. So that's the idea right now. Whether it'll fly, we'll find out on Monday. Join us, 7:30.
And also we have new class. Is in the morning, the friend of us, Fabrizio, really skillful yoga teacher, will offer his skills for everyone in the morning, Monday from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. in the dining hall. Everyone is welcome, and more information you can find on the posters.
But it's yoga in the dining hall, not dining in the dining hall.
Right.
It's everybody calling, where's the food? I go,
Yes.
by the way, that's another kind of untying of knots. No, yoga and Tai Chi can be used to untie knots. And you have to understand in this teaching, the connection between the mind and the body, the intellect and emotions is non-dual. So this is not like, oh, I'm just going to cultivate my mind and not in your body. Your body actually becomes a very interesting mirror to your state of mind, and your state of mind actually creates your corresponding physical alignment. So the interrelationship between the four elements and thought and everything is very dynamic and very real, and it becomes another way of taking your pulse. So these are called aids to the way. These kinds of exercises can be used as exercises to get at the understanding of your own mind and your own nature. So don't treat them too lightly, and don't hurt yourself at them either. Because some people will come at yoga and Tai Chi the same way they come at meditation. I'm going to get it now. I'm going to splits and stretch and rip. So, gradualism.
Yes, Mondays and Thursdays is by donation. So,
What days again?
Mornings, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. on Monday, and Thursday the same time. Morning.
So there's a lot going on here. There's yoga. I think there's still Tai Chi classes going on.
Right, of course.
There's Tai Chi, and then there's a morning sit and an afternoon sit. There's a Friday night class. There's a Saturday night avatamsical class, Wednesday night class, Monday night class. This could become a real hangout for you. And there's food occasionally too, so.
Saturday lunch.
Huh?
Saturday lunch.
Saturday lunch. So if you're wondering, like, hey, I heard vegetarians like eat, lawn clippings and stuff like that, you should come here and try some of the vegetarian food on Saturday. You'd be surprised. Now, I'm not encouraging you to convert to vegetarianism because your tongue will, go dancing. That's not a bad reason to do it, but you could actually see you could eat a healthy, good-tasting diet without, killing my little friends. So, just something to think about. For a lot of people who came to the Dharma, the kitchen was the gateway. That's a vehicle, by the way. There's a great vehicle, the small vehicle, and the culinary vehicle. And don't underestimate the culinary vehicle, because I once turned to my teacher and I said, why are we putting so much effort in making all this good food and everything? And he turned to me and says, Goting, you don't understand anything. If you want people to really listen with their hearts to the Dharma, you have to please their bellies first. Oh. Okay.
In Polish, we have expressions from stomach to the heart.
From stomach to the heart. Let's hope they keep going that direction. We're going to do the transference in English and then bows.